Welcome back to the Terps of the BeastCoast. This episode is just not going to be focused on any kind of cannabis news this week. It's talking about the industry as a whole. So, East Coast versus West Coast. It's funny how once the market shares or the market started to, become more open for adult use here on the East Coast, there has been a shift of people who not necessarily are from the East Coast, but they're here now promoting their brand from the West Coast. Now, for years here on the East Coast, because cannabis was so illegal, and there were not any legal grow, a lot of it came from the West Coast. So the West Coast brands didn't need to come to the East Coast because they were making the money on the West Coast from people who went to the West Coast from the East. Now, another thing that I want to bring up is that remind you that there's a lot of cats who are originally from the East Coast, and when California opened up to cannabis, a lot of them moved out there because of the opportunity that they can get. So things have been progressing here rapidly, especially in the New York City market, where things are now more favorable, where you don't have to go to the West Coast because we now have East Coast farmers and we have East Coast products that are being made here on the East. Believe it or not, the East has always been the cannabis consumers, right? The users of cannabis more than anywhere else. There was a lot of things that were still being done here under the table, under the radar. So there were people who still grew. There were breeders that still breed, and there was a certain use of cannabis that people preferred, certain types. You go out west, the palate is a little bit different. So things have always been here, but now that the East is not reaching out to the West, there's a shift. And that shift is the West wants to bring their brands here, and pretty much that kind of takes away from the opportunities that the East Coast themselves can have. Now, there's a lot of cats supporting people that are not from the East, and gotta understand, you do what you have to do, but just remember that originally people were here on the East and they moved to the West just because of an opportunity. Now that there's opportunities here, they're coming here with their brands. And what that does is not allow people who want to get into the industry on the East to build their brand. So understand that we've been doing it here on the East because, again, I keep saying that we left the East, some of us, to go to the West for the opportunities. That means we brought what we had in our mindset, what we were doing, to the West and help facilitate what they had going on. Now, the difference between the East and the West in certain parts, because there's still certain parts can do the same thing as what the West can do, is that most of the grows here on the East were done indoor. Out West, because of the freedom of the laws that they had, some of the grows were able to be done more in a greenhouse style, of an outdoor kind of nature. And when you do those types of style, you get a better return back on the plants if you know what you're doing. We have the same opportunity here on the East Coast to do the same thing when it comes to greenhouse styles and outdoor styles. True, our season may be a little shorter, but if you know what you're doing, things can be done. It was done before in the past. So, I want you guys to think about when you're supporting a brand on the East Coast, check into, where that brand is as far as, is it being used? Is that brand being used because it has roots on the East and they want their brand to be known along with them? Or do they just want their brand to be known? And just remember the opportunity that East Coast has now is that there's legal ways for you to create a brand here and build a brand here on the East Coast without the help of the West. Being that we're from the East, we know what the East Coast people want. We're not trying to push something from a different coast so people can have it. I always think if your brand wasn't as big as it was on the West, why is it going to be any bigger when it's on the East? And vice versa, Is it because the clients or the customers that used to travel from the East no longer need to travel to the West? Because everything that they need is here now on the East. Partnerships are good, but understand that if you're going to partner up, make sure that it's your brand on the East Coast that is, on top, representing for the East. Sometimes when you partner up and your brand gets watered down, just remember, you had an opportunity to build your brand on the East. There's opportunities that I had to move out to the West, and I said I wanted to stay here because what's going to happen to the patients? That's one thing I could say is that here on the East, we truly care about the medical end when it comes to the patient. Well, I did anyway. Remember the MSOs, they created the adult market so they can charge more for the same cannabis that they charge patients at a lesser price, because that's how they figured they can make more money off the plant. And they've been doing pretty good. You're hearing a lot of record sales happening for states like Vermont. New Hampshire's about to come online. Rhode Island's about to come online. You hear about the sales for New York. You hear about the sales for New Jersey. Connecticut's trying to get it together. Massachusetts, you already know they have it going on here. So, these MSOs, they're coming around now to partner up or buy out social equities so they can have a wider reach within certain networks. And even though you're partnering up, just remember that once you start partnering up with MSOs, you kind of lose some loyalty to certain people, because people rather support something that's built here versus something that's just not built here. So, even if you're not from the East, if you're from the South, Southeast, Southwest, the middle, just remember that you can build a brand without any outside influence. Bringing in a brand from another area sometimes can be helpful, and sometimes it cannot. I don't know. Don't forget, if you like what you've listened to, please subscribe, comment, like, share, turn the notification on, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Terps of the BeastCoast.